All right, I've got 6:30. We'll go ahead and get our meeting started. This is the Council Committee meeting, March 20th, 2018. Got a few items on the agenda this evening. First up is under the police. We've got Mrs. Kyle. Are you prepared to talk about the overpass?
No, because I think, well, I think Ms. Sudkamp had suggested to Mr. Kramer that she wanted to call this meeting. I think Mr. Kramer might have something for us.
Are you prepared to speak about that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Just for a quick overview, due to the incident that happened last month where 3 children were struck on Commonwealth, we started looking into it, and Patty made the, I guess, observation that this is not a school zone. Typical school zone, state of Kentucky, is the road that's in front of the school. Since this is a block away, it doesn't fall into the normal school zone. However, just looking at KRS, it appears that the council was able to vote to put a school zone wherever they choose. We've talked to the state. Initially, they said no. We sent them back some more information, so now they're revisiting the school zone there. So what this is Commonwealth and Baker, for those of you that aren't oriented to the map. So that's just it's kind of a standard of what it would be. It needs to be, I think, 660 feet from the intersection per KRS on the Commonwealth, and then a reasonable distance on Baker, since Baker is so short, it wouldn't fit. I believe it's an eighth of a mile. We talked to the state. They're going to do some traffic studies for pedestrians on the crosswalk to see if they'll do that. My goal is to have them place the school zone on Commonwealth and pay for it, and then we would do, I would recommend that we would do Baker, which would be very minimal comparatively to Commonwealth. So until we hear back from them, that's the plan right now. If things come in favorable over the next couple weeks, we might go ahead and draft an ordinance that we could read in April to do first reading, unless anybody has any objections to putting a school zone here. The only challenge would be to lower the speed coming in from the interstate. So there might be a little bit of challenging bringing it down to a slower speed, because it would most likely have to be 25 mile an hour through that school zone. Right now, it's 35. So obviously this won't fix all of our issues, but if the traffic's going slower and we have children out there, it's definitely better than having them doing 35. So right now, the rough estimates from Public Works is we're probably looking at between 15 and 20,000 to do all of it if the state wouldn't chip in any. I have talked to the school board. They're willing to go 50% on anything that we want to do. So that would bring it down to probably between 8 and 10,000. That's the extreme case if the state chooses not to do anything with it, which I think we have enough evidence that we can at least, if nothing else, if we can go in half with the state, we're willing, we're willing to do that if we can negotiate that, and then again, our half we could split with the school district. So that's really all we know right now. It's still early, but I think that the council, per state law, does have the power to move forward even if the state rejects it. So we'll move to that.
Mr. Kramer, other than speed limit signs, what does that cost by?
So what the big cost would be the poles and the flashing lights for the school zone. That's going to be the majority of the cost of tying it into Duke to be able to get a hard line in, because we don't want the school lights to be solar, because solar do fail, and when it's not an area we want it to fail, so we do want it to be hardwired in. And again, that's our first estimate. The first estimate just for Commonwealth is about $13,000. So I'm estimating high by 15 to 20 right now, but once we get a little bit more time, I'm sure we'll be able to get that cost down. But I do want to kind of throw out the worst-case scenario, just to get people's, or the council's feedback on it. If there's any more questions from council initially. Yes, ma'am?
A resident told me today that they were driving through and it was raining and there was no crossing guard again, and two kids ran across the street again when the light was, traffic were going, they were dodging the cars again.
Yeah.
What can we do until this happens to make sure that they have crossing guards over there?
The only thing we can do, I'm not sure what hour that is.
It was in the morning.
I know, but I don't know what times, because the crossing guard is there for a set time. It is a challenge to get crossing guards because the pay is obviously not very much. So generally we have a student doing the crossing guard. We'd have to answer that individually, I guess, case by case. The reality, there's not a whole lot. The kids are going to cross. They're going to cross against the light. They're going to do these things. We're just trying to do what we can with the power that we have here. Ed Bailey is looking into doing an overhead crosswalk. That's very much of a future option. It's nothing that's going to be a quick fix. This is as quick of a fix as we've been able to come up with that's actually going to make a pretty decent impact on it. Unless there's any volunteers that want to come and work the crossing guard.
So the teachers over there won't help out with that at all?
They started coming around the first week, but that didn't last.
Okay, thank you.
The only other thing is I had talked to Kathy Burkhardt about possibly moving. Right now, the proper crosswalk is to the east side of the intersection, to possibly moving that to the west side, because I think more pedestrians do cross. Now, I haven't done or had the time to do the kind of review if that's really the case, but from talking to PD and some other citizens, the majority of them are crossing on the wrong crosswalk, which if the majority of them are doing that, then maybe we just need to at least move that over. Now, it is more of a challenging intersection, which is I think why they went ahead and moved to the east, because it is a longer crosswalk, it is a wider one, and you do have a lot more traffic changing directions. But with that said, it still might be a better solution, and the school board is more than willing to make that adjustment also. Randy?
Yeah, I just have a question on the crossing guards. I received an email from a student who was there this morning as well, and a crossing guard was there at the time, and she said a bunch of kids ran against the light across as well, and the crossing guard just stood there, didn't do anything. I'm not sure what they do how they pick these crossing guards or what kind of training they're given. Do you have any idea how that's done? Because, it seems kind of odd they'd be there for that purpose and then ignore what's going on.
I think that the issue is they don't have any authority.
Well,
They're a crossing guard, so
I don't expect them to
they're
wrestle them to the ground.
Right.
but,
If they're going to yell at every kid, I don't know what. I'm open to suggestions. They go through initial training. Most of them are students that do it, so it's one of those things that they. Yeah, you're right. They're probably not going to yell at every student crossing, but there are a lot that are going to not follow the rules that the school has still put out. This is the crosswalk that you cross, and I don't know how we can address that. But I'm open to ideas if anybody has better ideas than I do on dealing with that.
I don't know what kind of monitoring they do of of the crossing guards' performance, if anybody checks up on them and so forth, but it just seems to me that if they're there for a purpose and they're not doing it, there ought to be some type of repercussions for that or some type of feedback given, because it kind of defeats the purpose to put a crossing guard there and then they just ignore it.
Okay, now,
Yes, sir.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Nicely.
these kids that got hit, did they go across the light? Did they run across the light?
Yes, the light was green and they went
Okay.
across.
Regardless of what we put up there, what's to keep the kids from doing the same thing?
Nothing. But what this will do is slow the traffic down and make the problem is a lot of vehicular traffic there don't realize that that is a major school crossing area. And that's why I think the lights are going to improve that area.
But they have walk lights, so
I'm sorry?
there's buttons, you go, a walk light.
I'm referring to the lights that let them know this is a school zone, not the traffic lights. The one that's prior to the intersection, an eighth of a mile out, that says this is a school zone, so they can be, when they're flashing, they should be looking for kids. Which right now they really wouldn't be, because not many people realize that a block away is the middle school and high school.
That is, I don't think you're going to get the people to go down 20 miles an hour, because the same thing right up here by St. Henry's School, Dixie Highway. They got that. How many people goes down there at 20 when the light's flashing? But even if it's a flashing, whatever, you're not going to keep a kid from running out in front of you. I think we got, you
I
got
don't disagree with you.
another problem besides putting signs up and lights, because you were going to have to train the kids, don't go across the light. And you can have guards there if you want to, but during this time, there's kids goes in after school's already started, and they leave. So there's usually kids going across there practically all the time. But I don't think putting a caution light up is going to help any. Because even if you're going 20 and someone runs out in the front of you, you still hit them. And we got another problem, I think, having the kids to be trained not to go against the light. Now,
Okay.
Matt, didn't you say that we had found a grant for a possible bridge, a
Correct.
walking bridge? Okay. Have we submitted that?
No, we're researching it right now.
Okay.
We're hoping it would be a part of the plan to widen Commonwealth to Dixie. But
Okay.
again, that's going to be a future plan. It's nothing that's going to be a quick fix,
Okay.
unless the city is wanting to put the money into doing it now. But I think it would make more sense to do it when the state's coming in to widen that road in the future. It would make sense to do all the construction at the same time.
I think so
And I think that's a very realistic option.
too. Mrs. Kyle?
I think we should go for this. I know it's not going to stop everybody, but when I used to drive to school in the morning, I would go down Erlanger Road and across Baker, and then I would turn right onto Commonwealth. And you would be amazed at when the kids did have the light, they were able to walk, how many people were oblivious to those children. And I saw a couple kids almost get hurt. So I think signage is a good thing. But I agree with Mr. Nicely, too. You need to educate these children, because he's right. St. Henry's, they have the sign. I don't think maybe some people slow down, but most of them don't. And a lot of them do the same thing that they do out here. They go through the red lights, as I can testify to. But we had a little girl who was T-boned coming out of St. Henry's. She had the green light. And we told the kids, look, you have to, even though you have the green light, you better look both ways, because that doesn't guarantee that those cars are going to stop. In the same way with these children, they need to learn that even though you've got the right of way, you got the green light, please look, because it's, these are our future citizens,
And the schools put it out to the families, to the students.
Yeah.
And we see what's still happening on. This is one thing that we can control, so that's why.
Right, that's why I
focusing
said
on
I
that.
think we should go for that. We're not going to find anything perfect, but kids are going to be kids, But I think that's a good start, so I like it.
Any other questions?
do you think if you build a walk bridge over Erlanger Highway, Commonwealth, you think kids are going to walk over that? No,
100%
they
of them,
will not.
you're correct.
I think
Nothing
the
nothing we
prob-
do will fix all this unless we pick up everyone with an Uber and take them to school. But again, I think what we can control, we can try, and it'll come down next month, or hopefully in the next couple of weeks. I'll have a little bit more details on this to see what the state's willing to do, and we'll go from there.
It is a big problem, but I think, though, if they would emphasize more on it at school, probably every day, watch the traffic lights, watch the traffic lights. But to keep the kids from going across, it's pretty hard to do. But just like up here I think Bartlett's got sidewalks down the street to go to Dixie. They don't use that sidewalk. They go down Price where there's no sidewalks. and they walk in the middle of the street now. What's the answer?
I don't think there's any perfect solution. This one's a pretty economical solution, though. Are there any other questions or comments on the school crossing? All right, we'll move on to the next item under Finance, Business, and Development, the Erlanger Business Association. Mrs. Fetty, are you prepared to talk about that?
Yes, I'll keep it pretty brief. I had a conversation with Pat Frew, who is the executive director of the Covington Business Council. He is interested in working with Erlanger to get something like this off the ground. We are meeting, I'm going to be attending the Covington Business Council meeting next Wednesday at 8:30 a.m., and then we're going to be meeting afterwards. If anybody's interested in being involved and you know, seeing what it's going to take to get this off the ground, we already have businesses that are interested in participating. I've reached out to Matt Grimes with Colonial Cottage, David Clegg with Alley's Walkabout. These businesses are interested in getting involved in the community and advocating for other businesses. So if anybody else has any interest in working with me on this, I'll let you have the details later, okay?
What was the date again?
Next Wednesday, the 28th at 8:30 a.m. It's at 615 Madison. And I can get you more details if you need them.
All right,
Okay,
thank you.
cool, thanks. Sure. It's possible. I mean, I'll talk to Pat Frew. He worked with Fort Wright to see if they were interested in doing something like this. The way it seems to be working with the other cities is it's an independent thing. It's not necessarily something that's run by the city, but they work in conjunction with the city, you know, for policy changes and stuff that's going to enhance the business climate in Erlanger. Working hand in hand, but not necessarily running it within the city. So I'll talk to him about that. Thanks.
How do businesses know about this? Well, this is just getting started.
Yeah. Yeah, so what we'll probably do when we're getting started, we'll probably just do like 4 quarterly meetings a year. The first one will be to get interest. So we'll invite all of the Erlanger businesses to see if this is something that we really want to move forward with. It'll be not necessarily, you know, the extent of the Covington Business Council, because they have articles of, you know, they're a real deal. But it took them a while to become that. So we'd like to gauge interest before we put a tremendous amount of money and effort into it, because it does involve lawyers making all kinds of decisions and stuff. So we want to garner interest first. So we'll be in contact once we have that meeting scheduled. Okay.
All right, thank you. That's next Wednesday, the 28th. Okay. Is there any other comments on that? Yeah. All right, the next item on the agenda is the tax rates and budget. Mr. Blankenship?
Thank you. You know, I asked for this meeting because, you know, the budget has a 2% tax reduction built into it, and we really didn't discuss this at our annual budget meeting on March the 2nd. And after that meeting, a couple of council members came to me and raised some questions about whether this was the right time to do this, and I kind of mentioned that at the last council meeting. So anyhow, I will tell you, I'm in favor of doing this, but I wanted to, since questions have been raised, I wanted to just kind of hear what the other council members thought so that we know what the consensus of council is and whether we move forward as planned or whether we do something else. Like I said, I think we should go with the reduction, but I just wanted to hear what everybody else thought so that we could make the right decision. So I just want to open it up for comments from the rest of council.
Go ahead, Mrs.
That's
Pitts.
If they are, that's fine with me. I just didn't want to go on an assumption, you know.
Well, I was the one that raised the question, and the reason I raised it is because of the pension issue down in Frankfurt and not knowing what is going to happen. I know they're proposing a 12% cap increase each year, and but I don't think that's official yet. I don't think they've agreed upon anything as far as I know. So right now, we're up in the air knowing what's going on. When I looked at our unreserved 3-year plan, it drops almost $2 million each year. And I know we have money. I mean, I know we're fine, but that just alarmed me. And so that's why I just said, you know, I don't want to raise taxes in a few years if this pension thing gets blown out. I'd rather just, my personal opinion was I wanted to just leave it be this year until we know more, till our businesses grow more. We have sidewalks to fix that are way beyond, I mean, they're way overdue. We have roads to fix. There's plenty of things we need to spend some of this money on also. Also, another thing is, personally, I just wanted it out of the budget because we really don't know what we're going to do till we get the actual rates. And is it August when we get those actual numbers? September or August?
Should be the end of this week. I mean, the decision on the pension should be.
No, not the pension. I'm talking about the tax rate.
That's the, yes, it'll be in August.
Yeah.
It's a
So
September,
really, in August is when we need to make this decision, when we get the numbers. But for now, I just don't want to vote on a budget that has a 2% decrease when we really don't know what's going on. By August, we're going to know more about the pension, we're going to know more about a lot of things, and we can make more of an informed decision. So I just don't want to vote on anything right now of a tax decrease in the budget. That's all I wanted to say.
I think what we'll be voting for by July is the budget, what the spending is. It really doesn't have anything to do with the tax rate. The tax rate will be voted on in September. And as far as the pension goes, I mean, there's, you know, I think we could probably write a book on it at this point. I mean, there's been so many options and so many things thrown out there. The one thing I wanted to mention real quickly was the 12% increase versus the 50% increase. Either way, it's something that we need to fight because it's not fair either way. You know, the fact that they're saying 12%, well, it's not 12%, it's 12% this year, and they're going to keep raising at 12% and 12% and 12%. So that phase-in option is still something that needs to be fought, and you know, it's something that we're all going to have to work together to get it straightened out. It's either way, it is, in my opinion, it's a horrible option for our legislators to be putting it on the backs of the cities.
Well, I totally agree with that. I honestly think we do need to fight it, but that doesn't mean we can just assume we're going to win. I don't want to just vote for a tax reduction based on assuming that we're going to win this battle. I just want to, and we still have to vote on the budget. And I just don't want to vote on a budget that has a 2% decrease when we really don't know what we're going to do till August.
I think I saw another hand.
I was just saying, we could do the budget because it's just a projection of our spending. And if things change and this pension issue does blow up and becomes worse, we can reconsider that when we do the tax rate in August. And at that point, if we have to, we can amend the budget. Could we not? Yes. Okay. So that's why, although I think you raised some real concerns. I mean, that's kind of what I was talking about the other night as well. That this pension thing worries me a lot. But we don't really know where that's going to end up right now. Honestly, I don't have a great deal of faith in Frankfurt doing anything helpful to us, but we'll find out soon, I suppose. But we can adjust it at that point. So I think we can, but that's why I wanted to bring it up, because you did bring the questions to me, and I didn't know if any others did have the same questions, so I just wanted to hear some comment on it before we move forward.
Go ahead, Mrs. Fetty.
So I don't know if you guys saw the KLC, the Kentucky League of Cities email. So tomorrow in Frankfurt is Cities Day. So what we're doing is we're going down tomorrow morning, and we're going to be talking to Representative Koenig, Diane St. Ange, Chris McDaniel, and Kim Mosier. We're on call for her because we want to make sure that our message is getting across. Yes, the 50% is unacceptable. The 12% is closer to where we need to be, but there are still issues with it. So we need Senate Bill 66 to have some alterations, and it needs to be pushed through.
Go ahead, Mrs. Pitts.
I agree with that, but I'm actually a little upset about this meeting down in Frankfurt because I was aware that you guys are going down for the last couple days, but we did not get an email till late last night about it. So we can't, most of us that have jobs can't give our jobs less than 24 hours notice to go to Frankfurt, and I really would have liked all of us to be able to go because we would have made a huge impact if this entire council could have gone. But less than 24 hours notice, we can't. I mean, I saw the email where he announced that you guys were going, and it was you. Okay, but the email that he announced that you guys were going to Frankfurt came out yesterday morning. And I looked to see if I missed the email he sent to residents. And when I looked to see if I got an email, I did not until late last night. So, and you know, that's fine that you're going. I hope you guys do something, but my point is, there's 12 people on council. You should notify all 12 of us of this meeting because we would have made such a huge impact going down as a team.
Can you go down on Thursday?
I mean, I can try, but I don't know.
I mean, we're all here right now. Can people make it on Thursday?
I mean, I have to check with my boss because that's still 2 days' notice, but.
I guess it was about the time I sent that email out.
No.
I'm sorry, okay, let me clarify one thing too. I have a job too, and I think we all do here. So we're taking time away from our job, our work, our families to go down to Frankfurt. And you're almost pointing your finger at us like we're doing something wrong.
No, I'm pointing the finger at the fact that you told one person ahead of the other 11. That's the only thing I'm pointing the finger. I just think you should just tell all 12 of us so we could all have gone down.
Well, I'm sorry you think that, Mrs. Pitts.
I have the email. It went out at 11:50 yesterday morning. We got ours at 9:30 last night.
Yeah, and what you're referring to is the email from KLC that announced that it was going to be City Day.
No, what I'm referring to is the email you sent to the residents telling them to come to the meeting tonight because we didn't want to lower taxes, the majority of council, which the only person that brought it up was me, and I don't feel like I'm the majority of council. And you announced in there that you and Jessica were going to Frankfurt.
Okay.
So my point is, I'm just reminding you there's 12 of us, and I think we would have made a much bigger impact if all 12 of us would go down, and I just would appreciate we all get notified at the same time. And it's nothing to do with Jessica. I just think all 12 of us should be on the same field and try to go down to represent our 19,000 residents and
Sure.
fight this.
Sure.
So if you're going to go on Thursday, I will check with my boss, and I'm sure everybody else can try to do the same and see what can happen. But.
Well, I know that Mrs. Fetty has been involved with the details of the pension issue. I know that she knows the details of the options that are out there and the 2 Senate bills that have been in question. It makes absolute sense for her to be there representing the city. So. Go ahead.
Can you tell me, if you go Wednesday, what time that will be? I have a trial at 8:30, but if a plea is entered, I might be able to head down. But just curious what the time is and whether we're going to move it to Thursday or not.
Yeah, and so, just to be clear here, Mr. Kramer is also going down, and he's meeting with some of the other city administrators. And the plan would be to head down there around 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. And we've got the meeting set up between 9:45 and 11 o'clock. Mr. Nicely?
With the budget and all, are we trying to get our budget cut down before we can give the taxpayers a lower rate? Is that what we're doing?
We certainly try to find efficiencies to keep the budget as low as possible. It's a good combination to have a lower tax rate and find efficiencies.
That's right, but we are working on lowering the taxes for our people.
Yes.
Okay.
Sure. If you wouldn't mind, come up to the mic.
Thank you, I appreciate that. We own Alley's Walkabout down on Crescent Springs Road in Erlanger. How much money is 2% dollars? Because we talk about percentages, but sometimes that gets jumbled up in my head. How much actual cash are we talking about?
If you wouldn't mind real quickly, just stating your name.
Oh, I'm sorry.
for the
My name is
record.
David Clegg. My family owns Alley's Walkabout at 2640 Crescent Springs Road in Erlanger.
Thank you. I believe that it's right around $80,000 is the 2%.
Okay. And there's, last I looked, there's an emergency fund of several $1 million, and then there's this larger pool of money that represents $10 or $12 million, or maybe $10 million, $9 million, whatever it is. Is that accurate, if I'm reading it right?
The unreserved fund is about 9.2 million.
Okay. Forgive me, I went to Holmes High School, so give me a minute to do the math. It would take us 170 plus years to exhaust $80,000 a year to reduce taxes for the citizens? Roughly, give or take? I mean, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like it's that urgent of a matter not to say to move ahead with a tax reduction on the citizens of Erlanger. Because capital, in the end of the day, is always better off in the private sector than the public sector. So that's my only comment.
Thank you. All right, go ahead.
No, I would just say, and that reserve fund is why I feel comfortable doing it despite the uncertainties we're dealing with. If we didn't have that, I'd be a lot less comfortable saying I'm in favor of this. But since we have that to fall back on, I think we're okay, for now. Who knows what will happen after the pension gets done with, but for now, I think we're okay.
Yeah. I think we are probably a little premature talking about it until we have some decisions.
I agree. It's
This
just because the
week.
questions were raised, I thought we should at least have a discussion. That's all it was.
Well, I know, I have heard a few other things that have come up. I know that Mrs. Pitts had mentioned that I was wanting the tax decrease for one more year, and that's not quite accurate. Ultimately, I want the tax decreases so that Erlanger becomes more competitive with our neighboring cities. We are definitely on the higher end of the tax rates in Kenton County, and it's not a one more year type of issue. This may be a 10 more year type of issue. But the only way we're really able to do it is to continue to chip away at it. You know, small chips at this. I know Mr. Blankenship has mentioned that a 2% decrease is essentially meaningless for some of our.
That is not what I said. What I said was putting it in real numbers. A 2% decrease saves a person with a $100,000 house $7 a year. And I would say $7 a year is not a tremendous amount of money. I think we all agree with that. But I did not say it was meaningless, so please don't
Okay.
quote me incorrectly.
Okay, well, that was the impression that I got, that since you brought that up. So it's a matter of staying at it. It's impossible for us to take a huge tax decrease to bring us back down to the levels of some of our neighboring cities. So, keeping at the constant, it takes a lot of courage for us to continue to stay at that goal. Because there's always going to be a cloud looming. And if it's pensions this year, it's going to be something else next year. And that's why I think it's important. The 2% decrease is negligible on our side. But it's the only way that I think we'll be able to do it. You do a 2% decrease for 10 years, and now all of a sudden you're talking about a 20% decrease. So, I mean, it adds up over time. And I think that's the only way that we can go about it.
I have a question.
Sure.
Or a statement. When you say $7, that a lot of these older people that's on a fixed income, they have to do it without something. $7 is not much. But when you put $7 on me, it is a whole lot, because I have about 15 or 20 pieces of property, so you figure it up. And when you raise my taxes on my houses, then I've got to raise my rent, and we're going to get less people wanting to come into Erlanger. So if you're wanting to make Erlanger great, you've got to give people incentive to come to the city, and you're not going to do it. But when you raise taxes on the houses, and I have to pay you more taxes, I got to raise my rent, and you're putting me out of the ball game. Now, you got to come along if you want people to come into Erlanger, make it attractive for them. Now, if you want to raise the rent $50 or a week, you do it, I'll raise it up there, but we're not going to get people coming into Erlanger.
Okay. Mr. Blankenship?
Just to clarify a point, I don't think anybody here is even talking about raising taxes at all. We're talking about whether they stay as a flat rate or whether we reduce. And I wanted a discussion of the issue simply to find out what the sense of council was. Now we're all going around talking about the tax rate, and it sounds like we're really arguing an issue that's not in dispute. So I'm not sure what the point of this is now.
Well, there's one more thing I wanted to mention. On Wednesday afternoon, Mr. Hahn and I will be meeting with a company that wants to bring 375 jobs to Erlanger. And they have made a point to say that our taxes are high. And I would love to be able to tell them that, we're preparing, our budget is prepared with the 4th consecutive tax decrease, property tax decrease in the city. That gets a lot of people's attention. There's not a whole lot of cities in the entire country that can say that. And that's the kind of stuff that attracts large companies like that. And I did actually pull up another thing that Mrs. Pitts had mentioned. Just out of curiosity, looking at the unreserved fund balance, when we project out 3 years, we're looking at the absolute worst case scenario, So we're looking at, we don't bring in any additional revenue, and that our costs go up at whatever it is, a 2% or 5% click every year. It gets really bad really quickly in that case. It hasn't, I don't think it's ever shown like, it's actually turned out like that. So out of curiosity, I went back and looked 3 years ago when we initiated this lower tax endeavor to see where the unreserved fund balance was projected back then. At that time, we had $5.8 million in our unreserved fund. And it said that by 2019, we would have $2,951,000. And so where we are actually today, it's 9.2 million. So we've saved quite a bit more money despite the lower taxes.
My concern was it did drop almost 2 million a year, and and I believe when I talked to Steve, in this year's budget, he put in the 12% pension increase, but in those 2 years following, he didn't put additional 12% and additional 12%. So that kind of concerned me too. So I was looking at it saying it's almost a $2 million drop without even adding on that extra pension. And my point was not discuss. I didn't want it to, like Randy said, nobody's mentioned raising taxes. My point was I just didn't want to assume when we do the budget that it's going to be a 2% decrease since we don't know anything that's going on, and I would rather just wait until August when we have more of the big picture and then decide what we're going to do. That's the only thing I was going to say.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, is there any more discussion on the tax rate or the budget? If you wouldn't mind stating your name.
Good evening, Thomas Durker, 809 Nelson Road, Erlanger resident for the last 10 years. If it doesn't cause too much ruckus, could you take 3 minutes just to describe this issue at the state where it's 50% versus 12? As a citizen, I hear that and I kind of feel helpless. I don't know what to do, potentially petition or do something. It'd be good to know what we could do to speak up to that. But I guess the whole idea, I hear what's going on tonight, and it just also makes me feel kind of helpless that you guys are stewards of our city, and you're meant to help our city maintain and grow itself. And it feels kind of helpless. It feels like I'm sitting here, I'm kind of saying, I feel like we're arguing about incidentals, and I just would like to hear us talking about fundamentals, because it's the fundamentals that's going to drive us. And if I were weighing the amount of time spent in this room on fundamentals tonight, just while I've sat here, versus incidentals, incidentals would win and fundamentals would lose. So as a citizen of the city, of the state, of our country, it's this feeling of helplessness and this feeling of just lack of confidence in adults that are meant to be stewards of our schools, of our churches, of our cities. And I just think it sends just a great message around when everyone's doing this for us to be doing this. I think it shows a lot of stewardship. And it's, my dad used to say, if you can't be outstanding, stand out. You would certainly stand out by being an advocate for folks that otherwise feel helpless. So if you could explain that about the state, I'd love to know what I could do to say, you had the party and we're paying the band, and it's quite unfortunate. So, okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll do my best to try to explain it quickly. There are several different retirement systems inside the state of Kentucky. There is a pension system for the Kentucky employees, which is called KERS, Kentucky Employee Retirement System. There's also a city employee retirement system. There's also a retirement system for the teachers and another for the police. There may be even more beyond that I may not be completely privy to right offhand, but the city pays for the city employees retirement system, the CERS. We also contribute to the Kentucky State Employee Retirement System. And at this point, and Mr. Bodie's in the back of the room and he can probably correct me on the numbers, but I think it's about $1.8 million a year that the city contributes to the state level retirement system. The city retirement system is very healthy. It's well funded. It's pretty well set. The state retirement system is in horrible shape. It's on the edge of collapse or bankruptcy. So they're trying to fix the state system, and this was a directive by the governor to fix the state retirement system. The method of trying to fix it, though, is not necessarily, I don't believe, what he was what he had in mind, but what they've come up with is to have the cities, since the city's system is in pretty good shape, have the cities make up the difference to the state. And what that results for us, they're saying that they would raise our rate 50% to cover the cost of the state retirement system. They're not planning on changing the methods that the state retirement system operates or how things are done. They're just asking for more money. And that would be an increase on our side. The initial projections were figured to be around $940,000 for the city of Erlanger to pay in addition to what we pay already. And that's a big dent for us. I mean, and there are other cities, like the city of Park Hills, their increase is around $67,000 a year. Believe it or not, that is enough to bankrupt them in about 3 years if they're socked with that. And so we're not the only ones. We actually are in a really good position that we can at least absorb it for a few years while we figure out a better solution. But there are a lot of cities out there that absolutely cannot tolerate this additional cost. And I feel confident that even if the worst case scenario legislation passes, that it's going to get fixed. You know, I do feel confident in that. So that was probably a little bit more than 3 minutes. Were you timing me, Mr. Burke? Okay, good. Thank you. Please. If you wouldn't mind, come up and state your name.
Is the 900,000 at 50% or is that at 12%?
That's the 50%.
It's the 50%. Thank you.
Yes. All right, any other questions before we move on? Mr. Durker, did you have something else?
Just want to say, have they fixed the problem? Like, have they identified what happened to the money and how they're going to keep
No.
that from happening again?
No, they have not, unfortunately.
Cool.
It seems like that would be good to identify up front,
Okay.
doesn't it? Yeah, I
Maybe-
agree with you.
Maybe whoever ends up going Wednesday or Thursday, you could send an email out and let us know what they said to that question.
Yeah,
That'd
we
be
can
great.
answer. Yeah, we
Okay.
can ask. I know or Senator McDaniel has said kind of in jest, he said the people who made mess of the retirement system were doing it while he was making a mess in diapers.
I think basically the problem was they just didn't fund it for 20-plus years, and now they're trying to make it all up at one time. And that just creates a huge burden on everybody, and they're just dumping it on us and all the other cities. A little of both. Yeah, I mean, if you put together a plan and say you're going to fund it and you don't put the money in, is that malfeasance or actuarial? I'm not sure, but it's not right.
All right, thank you. All right, if there's no other comments, I'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Under Codes, Building, and Zone, yes, Codes, Building, and Zoning, PDS presentation. Mr. Kramer, do you want to lead this?
We've got a representative from PDS that's going to go over something that we've been working with them on.
Welcome, Emmy.
Yeah, she-
Thank you all for your time this evening. I've got a couple of handouts that I'll pass out when we get to the end of the presentation here, but I will be as brief as possible. My name's Emmy Randall. I'm Director of Planning and Zoning Administration with PDS. I don't believe I've been before this body before, so I'm happy to be here and introduce myself to you. This is a big council. I've not been in front of a council this large, so must be very, very lively meetings when you have this many people. All right, so I'm going to give just a quick overview of the current zoning audit report process that's underway in Kenton County. We are working with 12 jurisdictions in Kenton County right now to look at the zoning ordinances. So basically, the current zoning ordinances in Kenton County were all adopted in the 1980s. About 80% of those ordinances are still similar But there have been over 500 text amendments countywide since about that time, since they were adopted. So they've kind of diverged over time to meet the needs of the communities. Most of you all are aware that there was a totally new comprehensive plan adopted for the county in 2014. And within that comprehensive plan, there were a number of issues that identified the need to update zoning ordinances to accommodate new development trends and new issues that are facing the communities. So we've launched an initiative that we're calling Zoning for the 21st Century, or the Z21 Project, to work on those issues. We started talking about this back in early 2016 with the Kenton County Administrators Group, a group of the administrators for the cities and the county, as well as Joe Shriver, who is the director for the county. We discussed this idea of how we might go about looking at the zoning ordinances and updating them. And at that time, there was pretty clear consensus that we needed to pursue this project and that it was important for most of the jurisdictions. But they felt it was important to first take a look at the current zoning ordinances and determine how they stand from a performance standpoint. So PDS Management Board agreed to provide a consultant to perform that work, and the Orion Planning Group and REA, Rundle Arnsberger and Associates, was hired. And then a task force was developed with members of each one of the jurisdictions serving on that task force to help guide the consultant and guide this process. So this will be a three-phase initiative. Currently, we've completed phase one, which is a comprehensive analysis and audit of each one of the zoning ordinances for those jurisdictions that are participating. This phase was funded 100% by PDS, and it's been completed. You all have received a full report of that audit from the consultant. The next phase, which we're going to be launching into over the next year, will be the creation of a blueprint code. And what we mean by a blueprint code is it will be language that's developed that will include all of the kind of standard zoning ordinance sections that we see in most of the codes. But it will also include a comprehensive list of all the different zoning districts that might be needed by the communities in the county, as well as a suite of different options when it comes to the regulations. So an example might be for landscaping regulations. There might be an option A, which is kind of the base model, and there might be an option B, which is the premium version with a couple of add-ons. So we're envisioning kind of an a la carte type options for jurisdictions to meet their needs. So this phase will begin here pretty shortly. We anticipate having a blueprint code developed by the end of the year. And then phase three, which will be implementation, will be PDS staff working with the jurisdictions and jurisdiction staff to customize that blueprint to really meet the needs so that you can have an ordinance that can be adopted by your jurisdiction. Just a couple of things to point out. This is not an attempt to have kind of a one-size-fits-all solution. We understand that zoning ordinances need to be customized for each community to meet their needs. It's also important to note that this project is being fully funded by PDS. We've not received any funds from jurisdictions for this project, and we're not planning to request any funds. This project is being pursued by PDS as a part of its service to taxpayers. And for a number of years, PDS has been setting aside reserve funds to complete a project of this magnitude. So we feel that helping draft the zoning ordinance is one of the basic services that should be provided by PDS. State law is very clear that each jurisdiction is responsible for adopting its own codes. So participation in this project doesn't mean anything's going to change. Nothing will change unless it comes back through this body for approval. Now, the audit process, as we started to work with the consultant, they kind of gave us some common themes that they evaluate zoning ordinances. So these are kind of the lens through which they were looking at the ordinances, making sure that they are business friendly, that they're legally defensible, They want to make sure that we're promoting efficient and flexible processes, protecting our resources in the communities. We'd also like to look at how we can reduce the number of nonconformities that we see in a lot of communities, simplifying things, making sure that new infill is compatible with the existing community character, as we're starting to see more and more infill type projects in our communities. So I'm going to highlight just some of the key themes that you'll see when you read through this report. Has anybody actually read through the report, spent time with it? Okay, great, great. Well, I'll just hit some of the highlights from that. One of the first things that the consultant has recommended is really reorganizing the code to reduce the redundancy, create a document that's more reader-friendly, putting some of the reference type sections toward the back and really the meat of the document at the front, the districts and the permitted uses, for example, at the front of the document. And also taking a look at all of the various approval processes. Most of the codes now, you've got approval processes kind of scattered throughout the document, so combining those all into one so folks know where to go to find those processes. Simplifying the ordinance language was kind of a key theme. Here's just a quick example that I pulled out from the report. This is section 9.1 in your ordinance that talks about the reduction of the building site area. As you can see, it's a paragraph that has a lot of kind of whereases and kind of some jargon in it. This is a potential rewrite of that paragraph where you've got two sentences that explains to the average reader what that really means in plain language. Another thing that you see throughout the ordinances is a repetition of something that's regulated in another ordinance just being repeated in the zoning ordinance. This is an example from section 9.2. It talks about interference of traffic signals with trees and other signs. This is something that's regulated within the Kenton County subdivision regulations. So the recommendation would be to just remove that language altogether from the zoning ordinance and simply reference the other code. Cleaning up the document in terms of punctuation and spelling, making sure there's consistent capitalization throughout the document of terms is another key thing. And then perhaps the biggest recommendation that we saw peppered throughout that report is just recommending the use of graphics and tables. Most of the modern ordinances have a lot of graphics and tables to help readers understand what's in the ordinance. This slide shows on the left an example of how you can portray the building envelope on a site quickly and easily through the use of a graphic to show where the setback lines are, where the parking can be located on the site as an example. The image on the right, I know you can't read it there, but that's an example of a one-page sheet that describes the zoning ordinance. So this gives some graphics to help show the look and feel of what that district character is intended to be. This is another great example of using the graphics and tables. This on the left is just an image from your neighborhood commercial zoning district. This is the list of permitted uses. This list goes on for another at least page and a half, as most of them do. This is a table that shows on the left-hand side, that left column is the various uses that could be permitted within the zoning district. And then along the top of the table is the zoning district. So you can quickly see within which district a particular business type, for example, would be permitted rather than having to go through each zoning district and see whether or not it can be accomplished. Just a few more examples of graphics. The one on the left shows visually how you could calculate an average setback within an existing block. And then on the right, this is a graphic to show how a buffer yard could be constructed. Gosh, that's hard to see. Some of these cells are highlighted. It's not quite showing up. One of the other recommendations is taking a hard look at the zoning districts and whether or not there's the need to have so many zoning districts. This example has highlighted cells in R1C, R1D, R1E, R1F, and R1G, where you can see there are just kind of really small differences in the lot width or in the yard setback, for example. A person who's walking down the street wouldn't really be able to notice those differences. So perhaps collapsing some of those into one district could be a good option and makes things just less confusing for people. One of the other things that many of the communities mentioned as the consultants met with them was just the number of nonconformities that we see in the communities. There are definitely parts of Erlanger that were built before the zoning got put in place, and when that happens, you tend to see where the regulations are put on top of something that exists, and you have a lot of nonconformities. So most of the zoning ordinances read that non-conforming uses or structures can't be enlarged or extended. That is in KRS, that language. But there are a few options to look at in terms of perhaps allowing those uses to be deemed legal, but they can't be expanded beyond a certain amount. And for non-conforming structures, allowing them to expand so long as they don't increase their nonconformity. So there may be some things to look at there that could allow people a little bit more flexibility. Another thing that we're seeing in many communities is infill development, where folks are perhaps buying one or two small lots, tearing down the homes and building a larger home. We're also seeing in some communities flag lots, where someone is parceling off the back half of a large parcel, for example, and then building a long driveway with a lot behind. That's not really addressed in the codes right now, so there are some things that we can look at and make sure that those infill projects are compatible with what's around them. Another recommendation was to look at parking and access management. Most of the current zoning ordinances in Kenton County are really about parking kind of to the max for that Black Friday max amount of parking that we need to have. We're seeing a lot of communities go to parking maximums rather than minimums, and really trying to discourage parking as a use quite extensively on the land, and looking at ways to encourage access management where the parking lots are connected to one another and required to do that, so that you prevent all these conflicts of people going in and out and accessing the different parking lots. Sign regulations is another great place where graphics and tables can be used to help folks understand what the regulation says. So those are kind of some of the highlights that you'll see in the report. I encourage you to take a look at that. Feel free to reach out to staff if you have questions about anything in the report or concerns. At this point, they're just all recommendations. The report also includes, at the very back of it, there's an example table of contents, and that gives you kind of a direction on how they're recommending the ordinance could be reorganized into a new table of contents. And then there are also specific comments for each section of your current zoning ordinance. It will say, you know, recommend, consolidate here, or remove this language. So there are pretty specific recommendations in there for your zoning ordinance. As I mentioned before, we're getting ready to start phase 2. So drafting of this blueprint language that folks can use in their communities. We're hoping that all of the jurisdictions that participated in the first assessment phase will continue on in that phase by participating in the task force, because it's really important that as this blueprint gets developed, it meets the needs for your community. So I hope that Erlanger will continue in this process. That should be completed by the end of December, and then after that, we'll be moving on to working with the jurisdictions on implementation. There are a series of YouTube videos that we recorded the consultant kind of going through some of their analysis and recommendations. They're less than 10 minutes each, so if you're interested, I encourage you to take a look at those. They're included on my slide here as well as on the handout. With that, I'll conclude and be happy to take any questions.
Thanks for coming out this evening.
Yeah.
Any questions for Emmy? Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right.
All right, next item on the agenda. Mr. Burke, are you prepared to talk about small cell phone tower or small cell phone towers? Okay. Okay. Mr. Burke said that he's waiting for some more information to come back in, and he's asking to table that. All right. If there's no other items, then we'll, Ms. Dietz, excuse me. Sure. If you wouldn't mind just stating your name.
My name is Linda Dietz. I live on Price Avenue. Mr. Nicely, are you leaving? Is he leaving? Okay, good. I wanted to ask about the crossing guard situation. There was talk about who the crossing guards, the school's supposed to supply those apparently, from what it sounded like. I mean, why aren't we supplying a police officer to do that for an hour in the morning?
The city supplies them, correct, Chief?
So we do have a crossing guard down there in the morning.
Yes, and the afternoon.
So what was the discussion about that there was no crossing guard down there?
I don't know. That's why I said we had to discuss situational, why the crossing guard wasn't there, if there were people that were having that issue.
Okay, because that would make sense that our police department would supply that, so I'm glad to hear that. That's good, because that makes sense to me. That's
The police officers generally aren't doing the crosswalk unless the crossing guard's not there.
Okay.
But we do hire a crossing guard, and it's through the police department.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention with Mr. Nicely, when you talked about with students and that they're crossing against the light, I think if most people have crossed any of the major intersections around here, you'll notice even when you cross, when you're supposed to and you start out, it turns red before you get all the way across. So that is an issue, and the students know that. So that's one reason they probably don't. The other thing about teaching people things, Mr. Nicely, it's kind of the same issue as when people put their garbage cans out for pickup, for trash pickup. The current city ordinance is you can't put it out to 4 o'clock the day before garbage pickup is done, yet many people put it out way in advance, and they break that ordinance. And in fact, your business, Mr. Nicely, on Price Avenue breaks that ordinance. And in fact, you need to follow that ordinance because since it's a residential pickup, your business is included with that ordinance. So I would ask you, Mr. Nicely, if you could please try to have your business obey the law and not put your garbage out until 4 o'clock on Wednesday on Price Avenue, so we can keep Price Avenue a nice-looking street, since we live on that street, even though you don't.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, any other comments? With that, I'll entertain a motion that we adjourn. Motion by Mrs. Kyle, second by Mr. Nicely. All in favor say aye. Meeting adjourned.